Have you ever actually noticed how the visceral roar of a revving V8 engine, that deep rattling vibration that just seems to shake the pavement under your feet, feels almost exactly like being hit squarely in the chest by a heavy, distorted guitar power chord?
Oh, totally. I mean, it completely bypasses your ears, right? It just
Yeah.
goes straight to rattling your rib cage.
Yes.
It's
Okay.
basically an identical physical sensation. Both of them are just pushing these massive amounts of air right at your sternum to create this entirely immersive full body experience.
Right, and that shared frequency, it really isn't an accident. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a super fascinating column from Monumental Movement Records, or MMR, about this deep, just inseparable bond between hard rock and automobile culture.
Yeah, it's a really incredible piece of source material.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to uncover exactly why the V8 engine and the guitar amplifier speak the exact same language of rebellion. We want to look at how this fusion created a global outlaw lifestyle for you to, really wrap your head around.
Because we aren't just talking about a few bands throwing on leather jackets to look cool. That's just an aesthetic choice.
Right, it goes way deeper than that.
Exactly. We are looking at how machines and music vibrated at the exact same frequency to help an entire generation break free from societal norms.
Yeah.
It was a fundamental shift in how people learned to express defiance.
Right, so to understand the music, we first have to understand the era that made this specific brand of, noise utterly necessary. You really have to look at the pressure cooker that created it.
Yeah, the context is everything here. The 1960s and 70s in America were just incredibly tense. You have the quagmire of the Vietnam War dragging on, the massive cultural shifts of the civil rights movement, and
this undeniable daily clash between these really rigid conservative values and a rapidly rising youth counterculture, right? The sources make a point to highlight this massive ideological divide.
yes, exactly. And just to impartially report on what the sources describe, the existing societal order felt incredibly stifling to a lot of young people. Society was essentially telling them to sit down, be quiet, get a haircut, and just conform to a very narrow, predetermined path.
It felt like a cage.
Right, a cage made of polite societal norms.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because if the cage is made of silence and polite compliance, the only way to break out is through sheer, uncontrollable volume.
Oh, absolutely.
A massive V8 engine's roar is literally the mechanical equivalent of a distorted Marshall amplifier. Both represent this uncontrolled noise that is deliberately meant to shatter the silence.
Yeah.
But why do they feel the exact same? I mean, it's not just that they're both loud, right?
No, not at all. What's fascinating here is the actual physics of it. Both a massive combustion engine and a stack of overdriven guitar amplifiers are doing the exact same physical thing.
Which is what? Displacing air.
Exactly. They are displacing enormous amounts of air to create low-frequency pressure waves. So, when a massive piston fires in a V8, it forces exhaust gas out of a metal pipe with such intense violence that it creates a localized shock wave.
Oh, wow, a shock wave.
Yeah, and when a guitarist hits a heavy power chord through a distorted amp, the speaker cone is violently punching the air in the room. In both cases, those sound waves are so large and physically powerful that they bypass the eardrum entirely.
And they just resonate directly in your chest cavity. That is so wild. But there's something about the type of sound too, isn't there? It's not a smooth sound.
No, it's harsh. Think about what a guitar distortion pedal actually does to an audio signal. It takes a smooth, rolling sound wave, a standard sine wave, and it overdrives the signal until the top and bottom of the wave are literally chopped off.
Like flattened out.
Exactly. It creates what audio engineers call a square wave. And that harsh, clipped, jagged sound wave is exactly what happens when an unbaffled engine forces exhaust into the atmosphere.
So our brains literally interpret both of those jagged sound waves as mechanical and aggressive.
And dangerous, yes. The engine sound itself fundamentally became another rock sound. Speed, immense power, loud exhaust. They weren't just modes of transportation anymore.
They were a physical manifestation of an outlaw lifestyle.
Precisely. They were a tool to escape the system. When you fired up a muscle car, you were dropping a sonic bomb that everyone within a 3-mile radius was forced to acknowledge. You intentionally shattered the polite silence of suburbia.
Man, that is such a vivid image. And that physical manifestation, that unavoidable declaration of independence, it didn't just stay confined to the asphalt.
No, it seeped into everything.
Right. It quickly became the definitive visual and theatrical language of pop culture. Think about the cinematic roots here. You can trace that exact pivot to 1969 with the film Easy Rider.
Oh, Easy Rider is the absolute cultural touchstone for this entire movement. I mean, crossing America on those customized chopped motorcycles wasn't just a fun road trip plot.
It was a metaphor, right?
A huge one. It was a direct visual metaphor for breaking away from the system. And the soundtrack is what really cemented this marriage between the machine and the music forever.
Oh, Steppenwolf. Born to be wild.
Exactly. Playing right over the roar of those motorcycle engines.
Get your motor running, head out on the highway. I mean, it is a literal instruction manual for the lifestyle.
It really is. It visualized the exact moment where music, motorcycles, and freedom became a single, unified concept. The roaring engine of the bike and the heavy guitars in the song were completely in harmony. It showed everyone globally what this rebellion looked and sounded like.
Right, but okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Easy Rider feels like authentic road culture. It's out in the elements, breathing gasoline and dust. But then you have these massive arena rock bands literally dragging that road culture indoors up onto a stage.
Right, the theatrical shift.
Yeah, and I have to call a timeout here and push back a little. When a band like Kiss brings massive pyrotechnics and literal Harley-Davidson noises into a corporate indoor sports arena, isn't that just a commercialized visual gimmick to sell T-shirts? I mean, how is that true rebellion if you're charging $50 for a ticket?
That's a highly valid pushback and a really common critique. It is easy to look back now and see the commercialization. But looking closely at the era, it was actually much deeper than a cheap gimmick.
How so?
It was about creating an immersive theatrical experience. They were physically translating that highway rebellion for tens of thousands of people at once. During their live shows, Kiss wasn't just playing heavy music.
Like they had the whole spectacle.
They were blasting actual Harley engine sounds through the arena PA system while literal roaring flames erupted behind them. They were turning the concert stage into a living, breathing American road movie.
I see. So if you, as a fan, wanted to feel that highway wind in your chest every night, you couldn't just go to the cinema. And obviously, not every teenager could afford a custom chopper.
Exactly. The bands had to bring the highway indoors so the fans could actually participate in that feeling of momentum.
Okay, that makes sense. And then you look at a band like AC/DC, right? Their music is deeply, intrinsically intertwined with the physical sensation of driving.
Oh, without a doubt. Tracks like Highway to Hell or Thunderstruck inextricably link the physical sensation of accelerating down a highway with the driving, relentless momentum of their rhythm section.
We just perfectly fit into that 1970s American speed worship culture.
Completely. The music and the vehicles were both iconic symbols wrapped in this shared aesthetic of velocity and danger.
It's almost like the distorted guitar is the spark plug and the crowd's energy is the combustion chamber. You really need both to create that massive forward momentum.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. But okay, everything we've talked about so far, the V8s, the Harleys, the open highways, the speed worship, is deeply inherently American. It is rooted in American soil and American muscle.
It is.
So how does a distinctly American rebellion translate to a culture with completely different social norms? Because this deep dive takes us on a fascinating detour into Japan in the late 1970s and 80s.
And it's a critical part of the story, because rebellion is a universal human urge, even if the tools change. This brings us to the phenomenon of the bosozoku.
Right, the Japanese youth biker gangs that emerged during this time.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to picture this. They weren't exactly cruising through Tokyo on imported heavy American Harley-Davidsons, right?
No, not usually.
They had to work with what they had locally. So how did they adapt this?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it is really all about the spirit of the movement rather than the exact hardware. The bosozoku primarily used domestically produced Japanese motorcycles, Hondas, Yamahas, Kawasaki's.
But they didn't leave them stock?
Oh, far from it. They heavily modified them. They stripped the mufflers, extended the fairings, and altered the seats to perfectly capture that core American outlaw spirit.
And what was that core spirit in their eyes?
It was self-expression through noise.
Self-expression through noise.
I love that.
So it doesn't matter if it's an American V-twin or a modified inline-four domestic bike. If it's loud enough to interrupt the status quo, it's doing its job.
Exactly. The American admiration for this concept of freedom, breaking away from the conservative mainstream, seamlessly overlapped with the Japanese delinquent culture, which is known as Furyobunka.
Okay, Furyobunka.
Okay.
And what was driving that in Japan at the time?
You have to understand the context of Japan in that era. The post-war economic miracle created a deeply rigid corporate ladder. The salaryman culture.
Right, highly structured.
Extremely. The pressure on young people to conform, to succeed academically, and to fit seamlessly into society was immense. And if you didn't fit that mold, you were an outcast. Society basically tried to make you invisible.
And the only way to fight invisibility is to become impossibly loud.
Precisely. These kids found their voice in the deafening roar of customized engines. It was a shared emotional language across the Pacific, a deliberate disruption of order.
I mean, if you've ever stood too close to the stage at a rock show and felt your teeth vibrate, you know exactly what the Bosozoku were chasing on the streets of Tokyo.
They were looking for that overwhelming physical sensation to drown out the societal pressure.
And what's wild is how that street-level overlap laid the groundwork for Japan's own evolution in heavy rock music. It wasn't just kids listening to imported Kiss records anymore. Japan started producing its own massive, rebellious anthems.
The musical evolution there is incredible to trace. You have a band like Loudness in the 1980s, breaking through globally with tracks like Crazy Nights.
Oh, such a massive track.
It was a monumental moment for Japanese hard rock. It took that domestic rebellion to a worldwide audience. But the underlying visual and sonic rebellion didn't stop there.
Right, it kept morphing. You see it shift into the incredibly symphonic, theatrical rock of ex-Japan in the 90s with tracks like Rusty Nail.
A masterpiece of a song, honestly.
And then it gets even darker, more avant-garde, and visually extreme with a band like Darian Gray and their song Obscure in the 2000s.
Yes. And even as the music became more complex, more symphonic, or more experimental, that core DNA of visual and sonic rebellion remained the beating heart of it all.
That idea of crashing against the system with overwhelming volume.
Exactly. The tools evolved, but the intent to rattle the cage was identical.
That evolution is key because the fusion of noise and rebellion was never a passing fad. It adapted decade by decade. But let's get specific about the hardware for a second.
Let's do it.
What exactly were they driving to make this noise? What were the actual machines mentioned in the sources that became the cultural totems for this movement?
Well, you're looking at automotive engineering at its absolute most aggressive. Take the Dodge Charger RT, specifically the models packed with the massive 426 EMI engine.
I mean, just the name EMI sounds heavy.
It really does, and the sheer raw presence of a 426 EI idling is practically a rhythm section on its own. The engine block is massive, creating an incredibly deep resonance.
Then there's the Mustang, right?
Yes. The Ford Mustang Mach 1. It was a pure symbol of 60s and 70s American muscle that completely dominated the visual culture. And on two wheels, you have the Harley-Davidson Shovelhead.
Okay, I have to ask, what made the Shovelhead so special for this specific music culture?
Oh, this is one of my favorite details. The Shovelhead engine is famous for its incredibly rough, pulsating vibration. In fact, if you listen to the chugging of heavily palm-muted guitars in heavy metal, that rapid percussive sound.
Yeah, that classic metal chug.
Right. They are directly mimicking the uneven, galloping idle of a Harley Shovelhead.
Wait, really? Oh, that makes so much sense.
Isn't that amazing?
It's brilliant. That chug, chug, chug guitar riff isn't just a musical choice. It's literally an acoustic imitation of a V-twin engine struggling to hold an idle.
Wow.
And later on, you see the Harley-Davidson Fat Boy become a massive visual staple in hard rock imagery from the 90s onward. And remember, the machines came with a uniform.
Right, the aesthetic of rebellion. You couldn't exactly step out of a Dodge Charger or off a Shovelhead in a three-piece suit. Heavy leather jackets, denim, and tattoos were the crucial finishing touches.
But obviously, the soundtrack to these specific machines couldn't stay static. The music of 1972 isn't the music of 1992. So how did the actual songs shift to match the era and the machinery?
The musical timeline is a perfect mirror of the culture's evolution. In the 1970s, you have pure, unadulterated driving anthems. Deep Purple's Highway Star is the ultimate praise of cars and speed.
A total classic.
Meanwhile, Black Sabbath's Paranoid used incredibly heavy, dark, down-tuned sounds to reflect the heavier societal anxieties of the time.
Then the 1980s hit, and everything gets visually extreme, soaked in neon, pushed to the absolute limit, and frankly, a lot more dangerous.
The perfect example of that 80s excess is Mötley Crüe's Kickstart My Heart.
Oh, definitely.
That song isn't just metaphorically about speed. It was born from the bass player's visceral, near-fatal experience with a drug overdose, combined with their history of literal motorcycle crashes.
Right, the danger was real.
And the song actually begins with a distorted guitar physically mimicking the sound of a motorcycle shifting through gears. It is the absolute embodiment of the danger and velocity of that outlaw lifestyle.
Then we roll into the 1990s. Grunge hits, alternative rock takes over, and a lot of that 80s glam excess gets stripped away.
But the hard rock outlaw spirit doesn't die.
No, it just crosses over and gets heavier. We see Metallica's 1991 Black Album, specifically with Enter Sandman, break heavy metal out of the underground and into massive mainstream pop consciousness.
And pushing right into the 2000s, there's a revival of that pure 90s style hard rock with supergroups like Velvet Revolver.
Right.
Through every single decade, whether it was the raw 70s, the dangerous 80s, or the heavy crossover of the 90s, the music continually acted as the fuel for these roaring machines.
Okay, so what does this all mean? We've talked about the physics of air displacement, the 60s counterculture, Japanese bosozoku gangs, 426 hiais in 50 years of music history.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. But for you listening right now, maybe you're on your commute or at the gym, why should you care about this historical pairing of cars and chords today? I mean, how does knowing this history actually change the way you consume the music?
I think knowing this history fundamentally changes your relationship with the genre because it reminds you that hard rock was never meant to be a passive experience.
It is definitely not background music.
No, in fact, the Japanese language actually had to adopt a specific word just to describe what happens to a person when the guitar amp and the V8 engine vibrate at that exact same frequency.
I love when language adapts to culture like that. What's the word?
The term is taikansha. It literally translates to someone who feels with their body.
Oh, wow. Taikansha.
Yeah. It is the profound realization that this culture turns the audience from mere listeners into physical experiencers. You aren't just hearing a song through your eardrums.
You are feeling the momentum.
Exactly. You feel the speed, the heat of the engine, and the weight of the rebellion in your bones. The music and the machine combine to create a full-body experience that forces you to participate in the feeling of freedom.
That completely elevates the genre. It's not just sound, it's a physical assault on the status quo.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want you to remember this. From the turbulent American counterculture of the 1960s to the neon-lit Japanese streets of the 1980s, hard rock has never been just an audio experience.
Not at all.
It is a physical, roaring, gasoline-soaked lifestyle. The next time you are out on the street and you hear the deep, rumbling shockwave of a V8 engine, or the next time you put on your headphones and a massive, heavy guitar riff hits you right in the chest, don't just think of it as noise.
Recognize that you are experiencing a shared historical language of defiance.
Exactly. You are feeling the vibrations of people demanding their own space in the world.
And before we go, I want to leave you with one final, deeply surprising thread to pull on from the very end of our source materials recommended reading list.
Oh, let's hear it.
We have spent this entire deep dive unpacking loud, chaotic, mechanical Western rebellion. We have talked about muscle cars, Harley-Davidsons, and Marshall amps. But buried in the history of this culture is a fascinating intersection.
Which is?
How on earth does this noisy, gasoline-soaked, intensely physical aggression intersect with Eastern thought and mysticism?
Wait, really? Eastern mysticism?
Yeah.
That is quite the pivot from a Dodge Charger.
It is, but it suggests that there is a spiritual, almost meditative quality hidden deep within the repetition, the drone, and the sheer overwhelming volume of hard rock.
Oh, I see.
That if you push the chaos far enough, it eventually loops back around into a state of zen. That is a profound contradiction to chew on the next time you're out on the highway.
Man, that is amazing. So let that thought rumble in your mind. Because just like that V8 engine revving at the starting line, or that heavy power chord physically vibrating your ribs, the truest impact of this culture isn't just what you hear, it's what you feel long after the noise stops. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.